Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to have you all here. My name is Danielle Barnes. My pronouns are she and her, and welcome to Women Talk Design Speaker Stories event. We encourage you to say hello in the chat. You can share where you're joining in from, and if you've been to a Speaker Stories event before. If you are new here, welcome. The goal of this event is to highlight a speaker in the Women Talk Design community and share their story. We know that there are so many different paths to speaking and writing and sharing your ideas, and it can be really helpful to hear other people's journeys. And so how this is going to start off is I will introduce our speaker shortly, and I will start off with some questions to get us started, and then I'll hand it over to you. So start thinking of the questions that you have for T and what you might want to ask while you're here. We really want to hear from you. And then we hope you can stick around for the last 15 minutes. It's a chance for you to meet other folks that are here in attendance. We have some questions to get you started, but I always find with these events, it's so great to be able to actually meet other people. And so I hope that you can stick around for that. A couple of quick notes. You'll notice that it says live streaming at the top. We're not actually live streaming right now. This is our automated captioning that we use with Otter. So feel free to click that red box and follow along there. It's automated, so it is imperfect, but we have that there. And then we're also recording this so that we can share it out afterwards for folks who couldn't attend live. But you are here, you'll get to ask your questions and connect with one another. So thank you so much for being here. Without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce our speaker today, T. Uglow. And T is a founding member of Google's Creative Lab. She works on a range of projects with cultural organizations and practitioners to enable artists, writers, and performers to use digital tools to amplify or augment their artistic, theatrical, and musical practice. She's written several books. Her latest one is Out and Loud, is that correct? I just realized it.
Loud and Proud.
Out and Proud. And has given talks also all over the world, including a TEDx talk that has gotten a ton of views, a really amazing 99U talk that you can find on the Women Talk Design speaker directory. And we're going to hear all about her journey. So please join me in welcoming T.
Yay.
Awesome, T.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's a great pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a bit early in the morning. Oops.
No, we have folks joining from all over. So I know it's night for some, morning for others, and glad to have you all here. So T, I want to get started by hearing from you. Why do you speak? I know that you speak and you also write and you share your ideas in many ways. And so I'm curious, what is your reason behind all of that?
It's a really good question. I meet lots of people who who don't like it and can't imagine that it would be fun. And do I have a good reason? I don't know if I have a reason. I like it. It's like the way some people like running or swimming and things. You just go. I think a lot of it is to do with performing generally, in that I've spent most of my life performing in one way or another, often lots of ways, but almost everything is performance. So actually being on stage is a very comfortable place to be, not because I'm acting, but because you get some fluency to you. There's nothing's gonna, everything is more under your control there than anywhere else, really. I think that's what it is. That seems like a really strange reason to want to speak. I don't know. You know what? I think I was raised that way. I didn't ever really want to speak, and I was pushed into it and pushed into it and pushed into it. I remember at school being shoved up on the stage to do things, and actually when people laugh, when you begin to feel some control over an audience and some control over what you're saying, this is a very powerful drug. Not necessarily the laughing bit, depends what they're laughing at, but both the thrill of the sheer kind of like terror, the thrill. It's a thrill. It's the same as getting on a fairground ride. So all of those things combine. I wish I had a good reason. I wish I was kind of like, I don't know, what do people normally say, Danielle?
I mean,
Why do people talk?
lots of different reasons. I think, I've heard from some people that they enjoy it. I think a lot of people have felt like they've learned to enjoy it, maybe didn't at first.
Mm,
I think that, if there's an idea that someone really wants to share and feels important to get out there, I've heard reasons of, wanting to inspire others to start speaking and to be the person that someone else can see on stage and think that, they can share their ideas too.
yeah.
So many business development, to find a new job,
Mm,
right? I think lots of different reasons.
yeah. Those
There's
last,
so,
yeah, that thing about needing to be representing and
Mhm.
getting ideas out has become more important.
Mhm.
Um, than as I've got older, actually, rather more than it being something I desperately want to do. Suddenly the messages become a little bit more important.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to hear more about that too, how you come up with what it is that you want to share and how that's evolved over time. So I'd love to start with maybe just to start with thinking about your journey. I know that you started speaking as a kid. What is the first speaking engagement that you can remember in your professional career? What was that like, and how did you get that speaking engagement?
Oh, I in my professional career is in. I think the first time I spoke was like actually in the back. I was kind of like DJing for my
Mhm.
boss. So I had this wonderful boss called Andy Byrne, who was the kind of true genius behind Creative Lab, and who was there like all the way through the last 10, 12 years. And he hates public speaking. And my other boss, Lorraine, who's the vice president of marketing at Google. And when I arrived, she was sort of very like the head of marketing, but in Europe, and she got swallowed off and taken to America. And I've been with them a lot of times, and they both hate speaking, like how you would imagine any of us, anyone normal, anyone would hate speaking. They get really nervous, they get anxious about the things, um, and I was in Cannes actually, and in New York, sort of accompanying him. I had this deck of things that I was really interested in called 101. It's something like called the creative internet or something. It's still around. It's really funny. It's actually really sad because so many things we can't do anymore. Um, and that was so the first gigs in a way were really high profile. They were like New York Design Week and Cannes, but I was running the decks because these things were all about what you could do with the web, and I'd compiled all of them, and I think I'd also been doing the same for other sort of senior execs when I got to Google. That was sort of what I sort of quite quickly came to this place of putting together talks. Um, so it was a pretty easy step on from that. I don't actually remember where it was, but I remember those as a kind of straight, well, not a straight guy. Yeah, like he'd throw to me to explain what it was that he was meant to know that he was talking about. And it was great actually. It was a really empowering kind of thing to do, to stand on stage with someone who you respect enormously, and feel like they're giving it to you. So I remember I've often tried to do that with whenever you get a chance to speak with someone from your team. It can be a really challenging dynamic.
Yeah, I think having that person there as a support can be a really great way to get started.
Mhm.
And how has that evolved over time? I mean, how did you go from that to, speaking on the 99 News stage or, giving a TED talk? Like, tell us more about that evolution.
Um, I don't think, I think it basically started out with doing a lot of, I did a lot of talks. I went to agencies. I went to, I yeah, there was a real strange sort of amalgam of going into agencies to talk on behalf of Google, just like a kind of business meeting, but it would be a business meeting. Um, and then every now and again there'd be like Design Week or the Webbies or um, I remember doing a 3-hour live HTML class, which was like a teach yourself to code class, which I think is probably really embarrassing now, but this is like 2006, 2007. A lot of people didn't know how to put a web page together. Actually, I bet a lot of people don't know how to put a web page together now. And this thing turned into like a marathon exercise. And it was, you know, that was a bit where you're like, you got to the end of 3 hours and everyone else is exhausted and you're like, oh, wow, I really enjoyed that, which I don't generally do. I'm not an extrovert at all. I can't do more than one person at a time, maybe two. But, you know, 2,500, that's fine. I don't know. I think it's basically just been doing odd jobs and then ending up being asked. You don't know who you're talking to quite often in these places, and they then come back to you and drop you an email and say, would you come and talk to this group? And basically I just always said yes. So I always said yes, and that kind of grew and grew. And sometimes I always say yes. When the lockdown started last year, I was like, okay, well, if anyone wants me to do talks to their schools or their class or their university, then I'll do that. And it's just such a strange thing that it's, again, I think it's fun. For me, it's fun. Like, I don't really know what the audience is that I'm going into, and I don't really know what we're going to be talking about. I suppose that's the other thing as well, is that for me, the talks are very organic. So they tend to be a little bit less structured.
Yeah, I
which
love
worries some people.
a couple different thoughts when you were talking about that. So one, when you asked me before why other speakers speak, and you shared that you're introverted. I've worked with a lot of speakers who have shared that they are introverted but like to speak because it allows them to find their people, and instead of like attending a conference and having to kind of, you know, be amongst all of these people, the people who care about what you care about will find you because they know that you're speaking on that topic. So
absolutely.
yeah,
I
something
know.
you shared that.
I like, yeah, I've also always been involved in events, right? From university onwards. I like being behind the scenes at the event. So if I'm not like backstage at a conference, then I'm not at a conference. I don't think I've ever been to one properly. I can't do it. Oh, I did go to a TED thing once, a long time ago, but I got very upset because people kept on giving standing ovations for talks that weren't terribly good. And then the one person who actually completely changed my life with the talk, she slightly fluffed her ending. It was about, she was a child behavioral psychologist specializing in young children. And she was talking about the creative sort of what happens with when you're 3 and 4, like what's going on in the brain and how you're understanding the world. And it was a 10-minute talk that absolutely changed my life. And I hate to say that because I think TED kind of sort of sit on their laurels a little bit with that, but it really did transform my thinking about how I wanted to be creative, and at a really important moment, you know. So I went away and read her book about read two of her books. So it is really interesting that those talks, you still, even though I would say I've never been to a conference, like I can still pull out that one talk from 12 years. Oh God, I'm so old. 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that was really important.
Yeah, the power of a good talk. I'd love to hear more about the topics that you speak on. What are some of the topics that you talk about, and how did you come to choose those?
I now have an agent, actually, and she is forever getting me to try and not limit, but define what it is that I talk about. I did come out of the lockdowns when Sydney had some. We've just gone back into lockdown, unfortunately, but we were having live events for the last 6 months or so. And the first talk I did was a hot mess. And she was there for that. And we had a little tete-a-tete afterwards. And I think it was just that I had so many things that I wanted to talk about, because there were so many kind of ideas and conceits and I don't know, spaces that you want to go, places that you want to take people. Quite often the talks are these slightly they are an interweaving of my experiences, my life, with the work that we're doing and how these things interweave. And as they got more elaborate, they began to be less about the work. Actually, the work began to be sort of like occasional, and we would drop back to a piece and go, this is, so I've been talking a lot, I think, about books, although people don't really want to hear about books. But I think that you go into really interesting places. We were doing all these digital books, and we were doing that notion of a non-fungible token was, we did a book using Bitcoin in 2016, and that was exactly what that was trying to illustrate, was this idea that you can have you can abstract a notion of value. Like, where is the value in books? Like, as you can see, I like my books. My beautiful partner is a writer and a poet. Like, I grew up, my mother's a writer. Like, I've grown up all around books, and we spent this time trying to pull apart how books worked, where the value was in them. And I think I probably do come back to that a lot, which is like, what is it about existence that's valuable? I think it's really important to kind of, like, at the core of your talk, whatever you are talking about on the surface, there needs to be something bigger and truer that you want to talk about. It can frustrate the hell out of people when they actually want you to talk about a product. But if you're not really talking to people about, you know, for me, it's about what we value in life, like what we find interesting. And you can get to a place where you talk about sort of philosophers and physics and the circus and books, and you can go all over the place. And theatre. At the moment, I'm very obsessed with sound because I'm autistic, and I have always been very obsessed with sound, and I can be a bit stubborn about it. But I think that at the moment I'm on a sort of course. I'm on a bit of a rip to try and articulate the way in which we have really limited our notion of what digital is and what information can be and how we interact with it, by making it also screen-based, just the square thing. When we have sound, we have light, and we have all of this space, and we have all of this time, we have all of these things that can interact really elegantly, and we keep making them into apps. And then you have to prod at them with your finger, and it's like, this is a really shit way to interact with information. So I kind of always come back to that, which is that there are other more interesting ways to experience the world. And I think if I wasn't working in digital, I would probably still be talking about those kind of things. I don't know what, I have no idea what angle I would be taking on it, but I'm sure I would still be talking about, I'd still be talking.
It's so interesting that it sounds like you have this like central larger idea, but you said you talk about all these different things, and you know, they're all ultimately maybe related to this greater idea, but it shows up in different ways and can allow for a lot of interesting different talks.
Yeah, there's normally several talks in each talk, and that's kind of what my coach and my agent would really like me to just do one talk. And I'm like, but it's so limited if we just do one thing. She's like, yes, but it would be really helpful for the clients if you could just do the one talk. And that's really good. I mean, it's a very valid point. Not everyone wants a massive like brain melting exercise. Sometimes it's really useful just to kind of dive into a topic that you have a great deal of knowledge about. It's also amazing how much people want to hear. I find that amazing. I don't know. Again, it's an odd thing to talk about, but I'm always rather startled that people do want to hear what I have to say, and that it's of value to them. I'm not sure how that works. Anyway.
I'm curious. I know actually I work with a lot of, developing speakers and current speakers that, suffer from that imposter syndrome of who even cares what I have to say, or, what can I share that hasn't been said before? And I'm wondering if sounds like you've encountered a bit of that, and how you get past that.
I think I go sort of like, well, okay, so now we're going back to your first question, which is a very, very good first question. And it seems like it's a warm-up question, but really it's the whole question, which is why do you speak? And I speak because I enjoy it. So I would probably do it anyway. I'd do it to an empty room, I'm sure. And it's a craft and it's a skill, and you learn things and you meet people, and it's like any other kind of, and if you practice from an early age, you forget that it's hard, and you sort of forget that it's a skill, and you are quite comfortable at the edge of what it is that you're capable of doing, and you have those disasters where everything goes wrong, and those things are okay. So I don't the thing about I mean, mainly the reason I get over myself is that lots of people listen to me, and I get told, but I genuinely find it really mystifying, especially as I keep thinking that I'm just talking about the same things over and over again. It's very peculiar.
How do you recover when something goes wrong? You mentioned that, this last talk that you gave maybe didn't go as much as you'd like. And I know that's a fear of a lot of people, is how do I handle when things go wrong? And I'm curious how you get past that, and keep going.
I think that's a really, well, I think the main thing is that you don't know how you'll handle it until it's happening. That's probably the most challenging part about it. But you don't know how you'll be in a car crash until you're in a car crash. It doesn't mean you should go out and practice it. I think the most important thing the thing that I find is that no one in the audience wants this to be happening, and they are suffering just as much as you are. I mean, actually, you do get to place this one recently where I was like, it was really difficult because the thing that was making it really hard was an audience that were not engaged and were eating, and it was like doing stand-up, and that's a different skill set and is terrifying in its own way. But normally, I've had talks where sort of I've been doing demos, and demos are very scary. I took props onto the stage for that TED talk at the Opera House, and afterwards everyone was like, I can't believe you took like 6 props on. That's just a ridiculous thing to try and do in 10 minutes. But I knew them really well. So it wasn't like I was going to do something that I didn't know. I would strongly advise against doing things that where you don't know it so well. And also that when it goes wrong, like, it's all right. Everyone can see. No one's going to kind of like, sort of like, I don't know, no one's going to boot you off the stage. It is not the Gong Show. And they also normally are really right behind you. So you can kind of work with your audience. It's a really good moment to go to your audience and go, oops, because those moments when you become very human and very real, and is where you build enormous empathy and enormous kind of like this big well of kind of people who want it to go well for you from that point on. And occasionally they're really unpleasant people and they don't want it to go well for you, and those you just carry on to the end. I remember I do remember doing a project, doing a talk where like I thought about this, and I had so many demos that I doubled up how many there could possibly be, because I knew that if one was going to fail, then I could go to the next one, and then like if that didn't work, then there was a film, and for each of these 4 things. So I think I had like 12 things and I was meant to do 4, and it was a real disaster. I felt myself sinking, like I couldn't speak because I was busy trying to get a computer to do something, and the computer was crashing. So then I went to the other computer because I'd thought about it and gone, well, it's all right because we've got another computer right here. And then something bad happened there, and then and you feel yourself going really red and hot, and you just keep going. And sometimes the weirdest stuff happens. I gave a talk at the British Library recently where the person talking just before me basically completely melted the system. And so they couldn't see any of my slides, and they couldn't get to any of my slides. And I had a 25-minute talk, which was quite tight and quite specific. And actually, they said, well, what was it about? And I just gave the talk. Just sort of like it all came out exactly right. And because I had to describe what would have been on the screen, afterwards I had people going, I wish more people did that. I wish more people spoke without slides, because, you know, we could just focus on you and we could just listen to you, and you described everything really well. And I was thinking to myself, you've probably got a completely nonsense, like completely made up version of what this thing looks like and whether it's any good. But it doesn't matter, does it? Actually, I mean, that's not the point. The point is where they have been, and what journey they've been on.
Did that make you want to start presenting without slides?
Nope. All my best jokes are in slides. I am a great believer in not speaking to your slides. I am a great believer in not having, and they generally are internal ones, because you can be a little bit more, like my favorite talk ever is a talk where the slides are so tangential to what I was saying. And it took, because I was like, this is a very clever audience. They don't need to hear from me. So I basically made the whole thing into a game where there was one talk going on in the slides with jokes, like as if there was someone else talking right behind me about something else. And it was a UX conference. So all these UX people at Google, very smart people. I was very intimidated. I think I probably didn't mean it to be as different as they were, but because I was on my own journey at the front of the stage and trying not to look too hard at what I was showing behind me, it turned into this really, really, really interesting duet. And that was actually technically fascinating. And those are nice things to do as well. It's like I saw Wolf, what's his name? Oh, either Wolf or Ollins, one of the two. Mr. Wolf or Mr. Ollins, give a brilliant talk with two presentations where they just kind of where they just basically just play tennis between these images, going back and forwards. And it was so striking. My brain had never been able to think like that. I don't know, this is back when you had to use slides, of course, but.
A little bit of an element of surprise, some humor in there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's exactly it. It's like, it's making your audience do something, go somewhere with you, also gives you a lot more freedom to make a mistake, because you're clearly trying something out, and they will go with you normally, unless you're pushing them too hard.
Yeah. I have a couple more questions for you, and then I want to open it up to folks who are here. So if you have questions, start thinking of them. You can start putting them in the chat, and we'll get to those in just a bit. I'm curious you talked about your love of books, and I know that you've published a few books. And how do you think about what medium to share your message on? So you have all these things you want to communicate, and sometimes you speak, but sometimes you write. And how do you think about what goes where?
That's a really good, I generally do things, I'm not a great, I am a great overthinker. I overthink everything. And I analyze everything, and I look for the importance and the meaning in everything. And people generally tell me to not think about it so much. But I'm not very good at planning. So I generally just, like I think I said earlier, I just say yes to everything. And invariably it's people saying, it's other people who want to do things. So all of the book projects have been other people going, and two of them didn't even start off as book projects. The first one was just meant to be like a little essay. And then other times, things that started off as an essay I did a project with the Royal Shakespeare Company again about 10 years ago, and they the thing that started off as an essay turned into a workshop, then turned into a event, and then turned into a performance. And before you knew it, you're sort of in Stratford upon Avon with all of these actors doing an actual full-on Shakespeare performance. So like I would, again, I've got people now who I know, who I would approach to publish, and I know publishing is a I love that it's still sort of, it's still a wonderful thing. I mean, I find it extraordinary that when something is printed, and it was the first book I did, which is this little book, this little essay, and they turned it into a Penguin classic, and a Penguin, like a Penguin book. I feel like I should go and get them. And holding the book, I was like, this is just a blog, but they've made it into a book, and now it's worth so much more. In my world, in my kind of literary world, my you know, and again, that's why I get massive imposter syndrome in that world. I don't think I've written a book. I have to write it down because technically my name is on the front of those books, but they're generally, people have asked me to, the Loud and Proud one, someone asked me if I would be interested in it, and then before they'd finished speaking, I'd kind of written it. So that was really easy. And the ones we're working on at the moment are very talented people I know who've said, would you do some words to go with this thing that we've done? And it's like, okay. And then but yeah, I basically just say yes. Keep saying yes. Just keep saying yes to everything, and always go for coffee. That's the other most important thing. Always go for coffee. Even if they don't want to go for coffee, go for coffee.
Yeah. Start to build that community around you that can ask you the things to say yes to.
Yeah, I can't network to save my life, and I'm not very good at asking for things to happen, but I like having coffee with people, and then I like saying yes when they want to do something. And I never worry too much about whether I'm being exploited or they're exploited, like, or I'm, you know, that sort of thing about like whether you're not, like the worst thing ever happens is when people, you think you're on the first date and they bring out a contract and you're like, oh, no, we're still, this is still just like flirting. It's not really contract time yet. And the best things I've done have never had contracts. It's like, because even when you do sign the contract, I don't know where they all are. I've probably signed contracts, like, but they sit at the bottom of a drawer. No one ever does anything after that. It's just people's way of making themselves feel proper. You can still do it. It doesn't make it illegal if you don't have contracts. Sorry, that's very, very bad advice. do not listen to that.
Take your own path. We're going to open it up to questions in just a minute. So again, you can start putting them in the chat, or if you want to ask your question aloud, you can use the raise hand tool. If you use a reaction, there's at the bottom, there's a little thing that says raise hand. But Tia, I'd love to hear, how has public speaking had an impact on your career, or just on you and your life at large?
I think it's the most unexpected part of my life. And I think it's taken me all over the world. I've been all over the world, and it's been, and to do something that seems so strange. And I do think that there's a really significant, I spend a lot of time talking about physical, tangible, like this is my problem with digital, is that it's not very tangible. And I think that we lose something very profound when we focus too much of our energies. You think about how much of the kind of genius of the last decade or two has been spent staring into screens. I think we lose something very profound when there's not like the physical interaction. I find it absolutely gripping to try and get people to discuss what piece of information is lost. If you can see me, I hopefully you can see me quite well. Hopefully the stream is good and you can hear me clearly, but it's not the same as being in the room with you guys. It'd be really nice to be in the room. I mean, the internet is amazing because we can be all over the world and come together. But at the same time, if we're all in the room together, there would be something extra. And just pinning down what that extra is has been a life kind of journey. There's lots of really interesting, and it's led to lots of really interesting work. So just thinking about the idea of what it is, what piece of information it is, because it hopefully isn't smell. I mean, I don't think it's a pheromonal thing. There's this idea of collective joy or collective euphoria, but people will talk about the idea of that, and that idea has been around for a very long time, but no one can tell, no one understands why. But it's information. It could be measured. There's so many things in the world that could be measured, and instead of which we're so busy measuring the things that we do measure that we don't we just think those ones don't count. And that's where that whole thing about value is. So I have met all my friends, all the people that I know and love, who I miss so desperately, are scattered around the world because I've met them in that incredibly intimate moment backstage when either you have like your stomach falling out or that kind of complete sense of exhaustion. I don't think I probably have forced myself to go to those dinners, but that's the thing that I would take out of my life and say that was the thing that I would want to keep the most, is the people that I've met. And out of my career, all of the things, they don't matter, they're just things, but those experiences have been really profound. So I think that whatever you're doing, it's worth, as long as you're talking about things you're passionate about, and as long as you have passions, I think that's the point. So that's, to me, it's very important. It's very important. But whether it's the words you say or I don't think that anyone ever takes away the words you say. It's a really useful thing to remember. No one reads. They don't read. No one listens. They don't listen. They draw what you have told them. I've spent this entire thing trying to remember my behavioral psychologist's name, and the name of the book, and I can't remember, and I couldn't tell you what she said. All I know is how it made me think and how it made me feel, and I think that almost every bit of learning that I've done has actually been very short like that. It's been a moment where someone's allowed me to, I remember someone allowing me to understand economics, like capitalism, like global macroeconomics. And I was in my 30s, I was doing a night class in design management. There are these moments in your life where you go, oh my God, that's how the world works. And they're spectacular. So those are the reasons for doing it.
That's great. That's awesome. We have a question from Aditi. What do you do after a talk? Is that the end of your ideas and materials, or do you either intentionally or without planning it, turn your talk into something else, such as books, other talks, or projects?
My talks generally evolve. Every now and again, I look at things and go, "Oh, I'm still," and it is like stand up in a way. You find you go, "Oh, I'm still using that bit," or there's a talk that I've been doing for. There's a bit. So you have bits. It's like jokes, really. So you kind of put your set together, and you will, whilst you're speaking, try, move things. You practice, you hone, you see what happens, you see how an audience reacts to things. And then after a talk, I always go and sit by myself for an hour or two. And then I normally don't do anything. But that's it. You're not really asking about what I physically do. You're asking about the material. No, I don't really. I think it's all just the talk is not an end in itself. That's what I'm trying to say. Like the other thing is that you will sometimes find that you've got something which you find terribly interesting, but it just doesn't unlock for people, or it takes a long time. For example, there's a piece that I did, I'm sure it's in talks from ages ago. I remember sending Ted a thing that I really wanted to do this thing about bias and algorithms, and how the best way to describe it was about normativity and curves. And it's basically about queer theory, actually, but it's about queer theory and machine intelligence, which apparently is not a good combination for audiences. It's only recently that I've started really, during that, there's this thing where you talk about shoes, and we talk about this program we have at Google where, or this game where you could draw things and the computer tried to guess what you're drawing. And this is very interesting because it's basically a useful way of explaining how it's useful to an audience, because you can do a very good example of this is how an artificial intelligence interrogates itself and discovers whether or not it is, and it learns to identify things. So it learns to identify what a shoe is by the volume, really, by numbers. That one looks like that one, looks like that one, looks like that one, but this one doesn't look like anything. And it's been a really useful, you find these little bits within talks, and they bubble up and they become whole talks by themselves. So I guess I don't have that kind of I don't have that sort of sense of what things are going to be at all. I do know people who do. It's like I found myself on a plane once sitting next to a girl who was very classy and beautiful, and she was, I just had to tell her that her jacket was very beautiful, and so we had to do the little chitty chat thing and go, well, yes, you know, I think she liked my shoes, and then we were chatting away, and both of us trying to get out of it and turn back to our things, and it turned out that we went to university together and we'd studied the same course, and that actually she'd been the year below me in a doing fine art at my university, and that there were only 20 people in each year, so we'd actually known each other quite well, but she didn't recognize me because I'm trans, and I didn't recognize her because I'm autistic and face blind. And then it turned out that she's also a speaker. She's called Rachel Botsman, and she's worth a follow, and she does a lot of stuff about trust, and she wrote a book about the trust economy, and she's much more of a kind of she's much more organized, and she's a if you wanted a kind of a brilliant speaker to follow, I think you see her kind of developing her work, and then sort of bringing out, like, testing ideas through LinkedIn often, and obviously in her talks and things, you can see her trying her material, and then you'll see her deliver her talk and it will get better and better, and then she'll do a few big talks and then put it to bed and then produce the book. And it's like, wow. And then you go on to selling the book, which is a completely different kind of talk, because it just is. It's very different when it's really hard, actually. I can't do that either. I just find it very boring talking about something that you did. It's done. It's like, here it is. Just read it. Much more interesting. Anyway, so yeah, I think if you want someone with the kind of formal process like that, there's some really interesting people, and they're you know, they're always happy to get a question. That's the other thing. Like, I am. Like, it's not like millions of people write to us.
Yeah, don't be afraid to reach out. And I love that you shared too that, you know, everyone has their own process. So even though you said your process maybe feels like a little less structured, you have a process that works for you, and she has a process that works for her. And I think that's so important, is to find that thing that works for you.
Yeah, it's essential that you love what you do, because if you're not loving it, then there are other things that you can do. And I've sent very talented designers off to be a photographer because, or I sent a very talented designer off to be a photographer once, because they seemed to be, they didn't believe in the thing that you could see they were very good at. But because it was easy, because it was fun, and it was easy because it was fun because they enjoyed it, right?
Yeah.
And that we don't think those things will work, so we don't do them, or we shy away from doing that. We stick with our spreadsheets or our emails or our production meetings because that's work. It's really definitely work, and you deserve to be paid for that because you hate it. But it's actually possible to go and do the thing that you're really good at, and that you love doing. And I think it's really hard to get people to do that. I wish we should spend more time doing that. Like, I find people who, you know, all the things I hate doing, I just find someone who loves doing them. It's terrific. Much better way to run a team.
So much good life and career advice in here too. I love it. Not just speaking. I hate to wrap things up now, but I do want to leave a couple times for folks to be able to meet one another. So I just want to say thank you so much, T, for sharing your story and your advice. It's been really incredible to hear your journey, and thank you so much for being so transparent and real with us.
It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure. Do drop me a line if you do have questions. I know that, like, actually sometimes asking things, the question that you wanted sometimes takes a lot longer to come around to you. But so I'm all over the internet. You just find one of those and say hi.
Yeah. Fantastic.